Sid, I'm the good guy. He's the monster.
No. You're not that.
In Legion Season 2, we have a dialogue exchange that I find endlessly interesting, one that I've heard a friend of mine refer to as his favorite scene in the entire show.
Hello!
David is worried about helping Farouk, so he goes to him and asks,
When I find him, and he tells you where your body is, what are you gonna do with it?
which is quite an interesting question. Considering all we've seen in the show is David's perspective and perception of reality, we've grown to see Farouk as a purely malevolent force, especially during Season 1, where Farouk was using David in a parasitic way to make himself stronger so that he could take over David's body and take revenge on David's dad. Or at least that's what David came up with in Chapter 7 when talking to his rational mind, which is exactly my point. All we know about Farouk is from the perspective of David and Sid. We never got an insight into Farouk's wants and goals for himself. In Season 1, he may have been sadistic, may have used David to become more powerful, but the reasoning for all of it is created from David's mind. He can't know for sure that he's right with his assumptions, and neither can the audience. Obviously, this question also exists because David would definitely be doubting himself about whether helping Farouk is the correct thing to do or not. So he's trying to dig up for an answer that'll ease his mind about helping Farouk, seeing as he doesn't want to disappoint future Sid, but he also feels really reluctant about helping the tapeworm that ruined his life and his doubts, which were reinforced by Sid saying they should probably be more cautious in the previous scene, would obviously be something on David's mind, and he has an opportunity to ask straight to Farouk's face a very important question. If David does succeed in helping Farouk, he wants to know he isn't going to cause more harm than good. He wants to know that helping future Sid is actually going to, well, help.
Live in it, my dear. South of France, women, money, power.
This answer can be quite fascinating on a first watch, while also being quite understandably in character. Most people will assume Farouk is lying, and he just won't do this. He'll want more. He'll use his body's power to be able to destroy the world, or to take revenge on David's father, or kill everyone David loves. Farouk is a sadistic villain, after all. But thinking about it, what exactly has Farouk done so far that would indicate he's lying? Sure, he's lied and manipulated David throughout all of his life, as shown in Season 1 and in Chapter 10, but when has his behavior shown he wants to destroy the world? Or take revenge on David's father? David in Chapter 7 was trying to figure out what Farouk was doing and why he was doing it, and he got pretty close, as we see in Season 3. But he didn't get everything right. From the point of view of what Farouk has done so far, he's been trying to regain his strength by living inside David's head, only to be trapped inside it for a long time when David was on his meds. His original plan was...
I mean, I figured I'd just poison you and move on, but then I thought our powers together, man, that'll... a cocktail!
Which clearly implies Farouk wanted to take revenge on David's dad, as the dialogue earlier in that scene in Chapter 6 implies. However, realizing how strong David was, his plan changed. Once he was strong enough to take over David's body, he wanted to get David on his side, so they could work together and be powerful.
Shit, we could give God a run for his money, right?
Farouk clearly had revenge in his mind, but he changed his mind, and the reason he figures that is quite simple.
Do you know why God matters? Power.
So, coming back to the scene in Chapter 11, can we believe Farouk? Would he simply want to live in his body, surrounding himself with women, making himself rich? I believe so. Farouk's one goal has always been power, but is this enough of a demonstration of power to him?
That's it? No supervillain, destroy the world bullshit?
For now, what Farouk says next can maybe give us an insight into his thought process.
This word, villain, do you know where it comes from? C'est français. It means, originally, one who lives in a village, a peasant. Do I seem like a peasant to you?
Once again, we're getting a really great insight into Farouk's character. He wants power, that's his main goal, but what is power to him? It's to be feared, to be adored, to be viewed as greater. Farouk isn't a peasant, a villager, he's a god.
It's all about respect, my man. You and I, we are les dieux. Gods. I don't need you to trust me, but you will respect me. Do what you want. Take what you want. Gods make rules. They don't follow them.
For Farouk, it's never been about simply having power, but what it represents. That he's greater, which therefore means that every other human life is lesser.
Because you and I, we are not human. Comme le lion. The lion. Does a lion ask the morality of killing a deer or a mantis of killing a hummingbird? Homo superior.
This all shows how Farouk being called the villain would be something he can't tolerate.
You know what I mean.
No, this is important. Language. The meaning of things. He called me a villain. Me, the king. Shah Shahan. Olio Hasrat Kharatmat.
He's not a villain, a villager, a peasant. If he had his body, he'd be able to prove he is more. And that's what he'd do with it. He'd bask in his power.
For decades I rule over my country. I'm a good king, strong but just. My people, they prosper.
The interesting thing is, this isn't entirely true nor entirely untrue. As we see in Season 3, Farouk's people did prosper, not because he was a good and fair king, but because he used his abilities to bend reality to his will, to create a kingdom in the way that would fit his ego. Now, does Farouk actually believe he was a good king? I believe so. We see in Season 3 the shows he puts on that are supposed to make himself look better, like the hero that freed his kingdom from a tyrant. Regardless of what he did to the kingdom in actuality, him believing, even after all this time, that he was a fair king that brought prosperity to his kingdom is definitely in line with what we've seen of him.
And then, your father. A white man. Which is, you tell me, important? He comes. Does he speak our language? Does he know our customs? And he decides what? That my people should have better? That he knows better? Who is he to make such choices?
Now, this moment is quite interesting because Farouk seems quite truthful in what he says here, considering how angry he seems. Feels like genuine anger. However, considering what we see in Season 3, it's not really true.
You deceived me. I came here in good faith. You broke my boy.
Your boy has always been broken, I'm told.
However, the interesting thing is that past Farouk in that scene deflects what Charles said. You can 100% make the case that Charles is being truthful, that he came in good faith and Farouk deceived him. But at the same time that Farouk felt betrayed and belittled by Charles, considering Charles had just found out that Farouk was keeping the previous king trapped inside a monkey's mind, and all his supporters trapped inside a little girl's mind, and therefore wanted to stop him, especially because Farouk mentions how Charles wasn't the first white man to come to him and try to stop him to save the world.
Year after year, they came. The heroes. With their blue eyes and white skin. To kill me, le roi. They thought, by killing me, they will save the world.
From Farouk's perspective, what he was doing was
Strong but just.
so if it weren't for David intervening and changing time, Charles would have confronted Farouk, leading to their fight in the astral plane and Farouk being kicked out of his body. From Farouk's perspective, it's definitely reasonable to see all that as if Charles was the outsider trying to impose his customs and culture onto Farouk and his people, because he sees them as lesser, which Farouk can't take because he can't be seen as lesser. He is a god after all. My point with all of this being that you can take what Farouk said to be him being honest with David here, or him manipulating David into feeling sorry for him.
You fed off me when I was a baby. And I'm supposed to feel what, sorry for you?
Is it such a terrible thing to feel sorrow for your enemy? Or what is he, except a brother with another name?
We're not brothers.
But you can't discount the idea that his perspective on what he's been through fits with what we know about him, and how he's been characterized as, especially paired with Farouk saying to David in Season 1 about Charles.
Talk about an asshole. Always acting so holy and then gives away his only son.
I feel like there's an interesting conversation to be had about the idea that Farouk used to see himself as the most powerful being in the world, until Charles beat him in their battle in the astral plane, which shattered his ego, and so he tried to become that powerful once again, to take revenge and show he's better than Charles, only to realize how much more powerful he could become if he joined forces with David. Then, once he realizes David is more powerful than he is, Farouk realizes his ego was keeping him from enjoying what he did have from life, just living with everything he could ever want, instead of trying to prove to everyone that he's better than them. That's even mentioned in the finale of the show.
I'm saying that we respect their right to exist and they respect ours. Yours. Isn't that what you want? To be free?
I think that is why Farouk invited Charles to his palace, because he found someone like him, and he was scared that they might be more powerful than him, so he wanted to prove that he was better than Charles, more powerful and more worthy of being adored, only to lose his battle with him and get locked outside of his own body. Getting back to the scene.
You're still young. You think justice is a glass jar. You feel it with your hurt, your hate.
This line is one that I've never paid that much attention to before writing this video, and I feel like it's such a brilliant way to develop and showcase David's victim complex. Farouk sees through David that he's trying to justify all his pain and hatred, and he feels, by saying it's all justified by what he's been through, as if he's the only one who's been through stuff like this. He's the victim for all of his life. First abandoned by his parents, then being used by a mutant parasite for all of his life. As if everything he did growing up was because of those things and not because of choices he made. I think the show wants to show quite clearly how this lack of accountability that someone can have by thinking the world is at fault for all their wrongdoings can be really harmful, especially to someone like David, as he sees himself as infallible when he's clear-headed because it was outside factors that made him do the things he did. So he's justified in wanting justice for what the world did to him. And so, Farouk demonstrates that David isn't the only one with that jar.
Don't you think I have my own jar? I'm a refugee. Do you know the meaning of that word? A refugee. Driven from my home, in exile. Prisoner in another man's body.
Nobody put you in my head. Or Oliver's. You made a choice.
Of course. If the choice is between death or life, I choose life.
The way the show mirrors both their stories to show how they both see each other as victims of some sort, despite what the truth may be, makes you question whether Farouk is a villain or if he's simply trying to make things right for what the world has done to him. Basically, the show creates the stories of these two characters to run opposite to each other. David starts out as being someone who feels wronged by the world, as he gains power and is able to get justice for what he thinks he deserves by being a victim of the world, using his newfound powers to mask his weaknesses. Farouk starts out as someone blessed by the world, gifted by being a mutant, who uses that power to feed his ego and show his superiority, only to have that taken away when he learns he's not as powerful as he thinks. So he wants to take revenge on the world for taking away his God-given gift, only to realize his search for power showed his weaknesses. This is all made very clear in the finale, but I thought it's important to highlight it here because our conversation here happens just as Farouk moves on from his thirst for revenge to simply wanting to enjoy the gift he was given. It's what Farouk tries to highlight to David by killing Amy later in the season. He wants to show David that blaming everyone else, be it Farouk or Amy, for his life being terrible only works to take accountability off of himself, which leads to an ego that can't take being viewed as wrong. He's always the victim, blinding David to the truth, which makes him unable to understand that his search for justice in the world will lead him down a path of self-destruction, just like it did for Farouk.
Seeing you like this, what you have become, the sweet boy undone by revenge. It fills my heart with such sorrow.
Continuing that scene.
Listen, I'll call you when I have the monk somewhere safe. He takes us to your body, and then you are gone. Gone. No one ever hears your name again.
I do feel it's interesting that David doesn't really have a counter to what Farouk said. David changes the topic because he can't really find a way to prove Farouk wrong. He did feed on David for years, but he was forced into that situation because of Charles, as far as David knows. Him wanting to take revenge on Charles is the same as David wanting to take revenge on Farouk for ruining his life, the never-ending cycle of violence we often hear about in media.
You're trapped in a war that you didn't start. This is my fault. I did this. You never had a chance because of me.
What are you saying?
I'm saying that war is not the answer. It's the problem. David, we don't need this barbarism.
So the scene coming full circle to being about David wanting assurance that Farouk won't do anything bad once he's in his body worked perfectly. The conversation itself was quite short. He asked what he would do with his body and Farouk said he would live in it. What we gained after that short back and forth is some great characterization for Farouk, but also it shows David's downfall before it's happened. It lays the groundwork for what's about to happen with David throughout the course of the season and how Farouk could become part of the good guys in season 3 and it make perfect sense. This scene is a great study of the state of mind of abusers. Both David and Farouk are victims. David was tortured for his entire life by Farouk, and Farouk is a refugee forced to live inside someone else's body to survive. They both carry their trauma, and they showcase the idea I've mentioned in another video that victims of abuse are much more likely to be abusers themselves. Farouk justifies the way he treated David by saying it was his only way to survive, which is partly true. Living in David's body was his way of surviving, but the way he manipulated David, scared him, tortured him, changed his memories from inside his head was entirely because of his petty need for revenge, perpetuating the cycle of violence. Abusers often use their circumstances to make their victims feel sorry for them, to make them believe that what they're doing is justified or that it's not their fault.
The scar tissue, all your nightmares, every symptom, the lies you made me tell, the drugs I did, that's my armor. Baby. I'm the lunatic you turned me into.
I really like this dialogue because it exemplifies really well how similar David is to Farouk, and how you can see David's downfall before it happens, because he's following the same path Farouk took, that ended up hurting himself and David for so long.